Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at the Glycerin 21, both the Stealthfit version and the original. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say that these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and the file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. The Glycerin is one of the thickest and softest max cushion neutral daily trainers that Brooks makes. Great for those longer runs or for people that just want a ton of midsole underfoot. It's also kind of theoretically the larger and thicker version of the Brooks Ghost, which is Brooks' more kind of classic, conventional, neutral daily trainer. It has a more traditional ride. So if you like the Ghost but need a little bit more cushioning under your foot, that is where the Glycerin series comes in. Now, it does get a little bit confusing because there's a bunch of different versions. There is the original Glycerin, which we're taking a look at today. Then we have the Glycerin Stealthfit edition, which has this kind of elastic knit upper, which we'll also talk about. And then there's the Glycerin GTS, which is very similar to the original Glycerin, although they'll basically add some guide rails on the lateral and medial side to kind of keep you on the correct direction. GTS stands for Go to Support. Anytime Brooks adds that GTS term to the end of a shoe name, it means it's a stability running shoe and has those foam sidewalls towards the rear to give you some stability. But for today, we're taking a look at the neutral version, both the original and the Stealthfit. All versions of the Glycerin 21 cost $160, so it doesn't matter if you get the GTS, Stealthfit, or original, it's $160. Now, with regard to weight, there is some slight difference. The Stealthfit is the lightest at 9.3 ounces, while the original comes in at 9.8. So not super light, but also not super heavy. It's pretty average for a shoe in this category. The Glycerin gets 2 more millimeters of stack height this year, which I think makes this the thickest Glycerin ever. And the stack height and drop are both the same on the Stealthfit and original, with 28 millimeters in the heel, 18 in the forefoot for a 10 millimeter heel to toe drop. So let's talk about the uppers, because that's really what separates these two shoes. And I will say they feel completely different. Starting off with the Stealthfit edition, we have a slightly snug knit material for the upper. It does fit true to size with regard to length, although I will say it is rather snug through the midfoot, especially compared to the original upper version, which we'll talk about next. There's a decent amount of stretch in the toe box, with most of the stretch and elasticity coming from the tongue, which is integrated directly into the upper itself. The entire upper is just one piece of that kind of knit fabric, if you will. Moving towards the back of the shoe, we do have this kind of knit collar, which Brooks seems to put on a lot of their Stealthfit shoes. For me, it didn't bother me at all, and it may have helped keep some debris from getting inside, but otherwise went relatively unnoticed, didn't really interact with my ankle whatsoever. I will say the heel counter is rather bendable and flexible, especially if you compare it to the original version, which is rather stiff and rigid. So that's quite a big difference between these two shoes. We also have an external lacing frame, which is basically these 2 strands of rope that go down the midfoot, and then the laces interact those 2 strands of rope and pull the upper together as you tie your laces, where on the traditional upper, we have a more classic approach where it goes through the upper and then you pull those and that kind of brings the upper together, where again, on the Stealthfit, it's just all one piece of that knit fabric. Now for me, the lockdown was okay. Breathability, not that great on this knit version, especially when compared to the original. So for performance running, I'm going with the original version just because it has a much better lockdown. And for lifestyle and casual wear, I will probably go with the Stealthfit edition just because I think it looks cooler, which I realize doesn't make a huge difference, but the lockdown wasn't as good compared to the original for the reasons I'm about to talk about. We no longer have an engineered mesh upper on the Glycerin. It's now what Brooks is calling a warp knit upper, which I realize may be confusing because both versions of the Glycerin are now knit materials. The big difference is this knit fabric is not elastic really at all. It has a little bit of give to it, very similar to like what an engineered mesh upper feels like, where the Stealthfit version is definitely stretchy and elastic. So it's a key differentiating factor, and I will say this version of what, again, Brooks is calling their warp knit has better breathability compared to the Stealthfit version, which is also another reason I like this one a bit more for performance running. It does come in about 0.5 of an ounce heavier, so you do get a little bit more weight, but I think it's well worth it, especially because the heel counter is much more rigid and has more padding. And I do prefer the more conventional classic tongue, which is not gusseted. I do wish it was, but you have a really kind of classic, well-padded Brooks tongue, which allows me to get a proper fit. And I just felt like I was able to lock my foot in much easier into the Glycerin 21 original platform compared to the Stealthfit upper. Again, the Stealthfit upper wasn't bad, it's just not as good compared to this original version. I'll also say the original upper has more room in the toe box and midfoot compared to the Stealthfit version, so if you have a higher volume foot, I would recommend the original just because it feels a little bit nicer, and I do appreciate the extra room in the toe box. It doesn't feel that cramped. Some Brooks shoes I feel like taper a little bit too hard, and that really wasn't the case here on the Glycerin 21 original upper version. And now for the midsoles, and even though the uppers are different, the midsoles are exactly the same. So I'll move the Stealthfit version off to the side for now. The midsole foam is still being branded as DNA LOFT V3, which is a nitrogen-infused foam. However, unlike last year, this year's version of DNA LOFT V3 becomes much lighter, softer, and bouncier in my opinion. And on top of that, we get 2 more millimeters of stack height without the shoe really gaining a whole lot of weight. So the shoe gets larger, it gets thicker, and it gets softer, which I think provides a much more enjoyable underfoot experience. And honestly, I will say this is probably my favorite Brooks shoe that they have. It feels like just a solid classic max cushion trainer. I think it gives you a very enjoyable, well-cushioned experience with a rather noticeable rocker geometry, which I think comes alive a little bit more here in this 21st version. Now, is this the most exciting, fun, and bouncy midsole around? No, not necessarily. I do think Brooks has some work to do, but I think this version of DNA LOFT V3 is a huge move in the correct direction. It's much more enjoyable and is also much more approachable. So for someone who doesn't want a super squirrely foam, I think it does a decent job of giving you some stability. It's definitely less stable compared to last year, but I do appreciate the extra level of softness that this version brings. And in classic Brooks fashion, we do have a ton of thick rubber coverage here. They added some rubber in between the flex grooves to help stiffen things up in the forefoot, make it a little bit snappier. Now, I will say this isn't the most stiff or rigid Ultra Max cushion or max cushion shoe that I have used, but it does a decent job at helping you notice that rocker geometry, which I do think is more significant than prior versions. So overall, I do think this new version of the Glycerin is my favorite Brooks training shoe, especially compared to like the Hyperion, the Ghost, the Levitate. This just, I think, feels the most comfortable and fun to me. Now, sometimes Brooks and running shoe companies in general will just make small incremental changes year over year, and I don't think that's what took place here. This is a massive shift, and at least in my opinion, in the correct direction. Get more stack height without the shoe having to get a whole lot heavier. The upper is rather comfortable and accommodating, and that new midsole foam, I think, does a nice job of giving you a nice soft plush underfoot feel while giving you a moderate amount of energy return as well. Now, is it the most exciting, max cushion trainer I've used? No, not necessarily, but I think for Brooks, it's a wonderful option. I think a lot of people are going to like it. And the Stealthfit option, I think, will be a nice way to go for some people, especially if you like the aesthetics and a more snug and elastic upper. I think it's a solid option as well. I do prefer for performance running the original Glycerin 21 upper, but I think the Stealthfit just looks cooler as well. So it depends on what you're going for, but I think that's at least how I size it up. Performance running, original, and for aesthetic and lifestyle, Stealthfit. But that's just me. Well, that concludes the review. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think? I would love to hear from you. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.